Hi, you've clicked onto today's tropical tidbit for Friday. Over here in the Atlantic, still dealing with two systems. There's actually a third one way up in the North Atlantic, Invest 94L, that's been attempting to fire thunderstorms over a weak little center. It's one of those really weak storms like Jose that we had last week that may or not get named by the NHC. Really is no threat to anybody and nobody really cares. We'll see if we get a name thrown away or not, but for now we're dealing with Kadia and this over here, Tropical Depression 13, which should be Lee by now. We're going to look at the floater here, and you can see that it's really wound up since yesterday. Look at the improvement in the westerly fetch inflow into the southern side of the storm. I mean, this whole area was full of just weak and then stationary winds in this area. Now we have a very strong westerly fetch, almost stronger in some ways than the easterly fetch on the northern side. This is really winding up nicely. The center is somewhere in here near the western edge of the convective mass, and you can see that it's still weighted to the eastern side, but wind shear is a little bit lower here, and this is really starting to get going. Pressures are down to about 1004 millibars, and I don't really understand why this is not named yet. We've got buoys, or actually I think some of these are actually oil rigs, but we had sustained winds up to 43 knots here, and then we had a sustained wind up to 44 knots and a gust to 55 knots, which is 65 miles per hour at this rig. And then we had the air pressure down to almost 1004 millibars at this one place, and that wasn't even at the center. So I don't really understand why this isn't named yet. Tropical storm force winds are 35 knots, but we will see. I fully expect an upgrade at some point this afternoon. The NHC will name this Lee, and we'll have a tropical storm moving towards the North Gulf Coast. Now, this is the water vapor imagery. You can see lots of deep convection is firing with this now. The warm waters are doing their work, and you can see why we were concerned about this trying to wind up pretty fast here. It's actually organizing fairly quickly despite its appearance. Now, you can see a little bit of a spin in here. This is actually the upper low that was over southeast Louisiana yesterday, now starting to move off a little bit to the west and trying to move down a little bit to the southwest, maybe on the west side of the system, still trying to shear the northern side, and it's also inhibiting outflow and convection on the western side by bringing in dry air. So this is making the storm look very lopsided, and it may continue to do that for the next couple of days, which is one thing that may prevent this from becoming a hurricane right away and will limit intensification in the short term. So this little upper low here is going to be the main limiting factor. There's also a lot of dry air over Texas, and this ground is so dry because of the drought. The soundings in here are just incredible. The dryness of the air in here is amazing. So this inflow that's coming off, we talked about how strong that inflow is. It is sourcing off of the land in here. So there's dry air getting pulled into the circulation, and the warm waters in here will help mix that out, but it is still going to be a limiting issue since the storm will be sitting pretty close to the coast over here. These are the forecast models this morning, initializing the storm down here. You can see what's happened now. Notice how we've got a general consensus that this is going to move north or northeast eventually, very slowly, but eventually. Compare that to yesterday morning when I cut the video. Remember that we had very few models in here. We had a lot of meandering tracks, and then the bulk of them actually took it west-southwest into Texas. Remember how we were talking about how the logic favored this trying to move west, but then getting blocked and having to come back northeast for the end game into Louisiana, possibly with a loop or with just a bending of the track. And we can see that this morning the models have now come more around to that idea, and that's aiding the confidence in my forecast jack that I think is pretty good in terms of the reasoning here. There may or may not be a loop like I forecasted in here, but those loops are hard to forecast. This did try to come northwest. Eventually its progress is getting blocked, and then it's going to move into Louisiana here probably sometime on Sunday night. It's going to be a little bit tricky with the timing here with when it actually comes ashore, because it could hang around the coast for quite a while through even Monday. The NHC has this coming in 48 hours, which would be Sunday morning. So there's a little bit of differences in the timing here, and the models disagree by up to 24 to 48 hours on the exact landfall time. That will determine how strong it actually tries to get in here. This is the European out to 48 hours. You can see the storm is deepening off the Louisiana coast. Notice that there's this shortwave trough coming across the northern plains, and I forgot to show you that on the water vapor. You can see this trough kind of in here. See the jet stream flow sort of kinks in here before it moves off to the northeast over Canada. So there's a little bit of a kink here, and we're seeing that shortwave trough that's now trying to come in towards the northern U.S. And as this slowly comes across, we're going to see it show up here, and you can see that the main center of the ridge shifts over to the east with another center left behind over the Texas and Four Corners region. There's a weakness in between due to the shortwave to the north, and thus this is trying to pull what would be Lee northward into Louisiana. If we go out to day 3, this would be Monday, or Sunday night rather. You can see that it's just now moving onto the coast here. So it hangs out over the water until Sunday night, which is 60 hours from right now, and the trough is up here to the north. So this is definitely going to get pulled eventually to the northeast, but very slowly, because if we go out to Sunday night, you can see it's still just right on the coast here, right over the Mississippi River Delta and the Mississippi coast. So this trough is not going to want to pull it too fast, so it's going to be a very slow mover, and it's going to be interesting to see how long it can try to hang out over the water and how strong it may get. We're going to be talking about the water depth in a second here, but if we forget that for a minute, if it's going to stay over water, it's probably not going to be able to be a hurricane unless it's over the water through Sunday night and into Monday. If it moves ashore before then, it's probably going to stay a tropical storm. But as we mentioned, the water depth here, this is going to be something that could become an issue. You notice that the depth of the 26-degree isotherm, 26 degrees Celsius, is fairly deep in here. These greens and yellows indicate very deep warm water, which means that it's very hard to cool it down and deplete its energy, because stronger systems tend to upwell colder water underneath themselves if they sit over a certain area for too long, and they can actually provide a negative effect to themselves and help weaken themselves by pulling up that colder water. That usually only happens when the water is shallow, the warm water. You can see that it is shallow over by the shelf waters of the coast here, but out in the middle of the Gulf, it's very deep. In other words, future Lee is not going to have any issues if it's this far off the coast right in here. If he's sitting right on the coast for a couple of days, that could be an issue with some upwelling of the colder water. If he's a stronger tropical storm or a minimal hurricane, that could become an issue. However, I don't expect it to become a very significant issue by the time our system makes landfall. We'll have to watch how far it tries to sit off the coast. So again, this will probably be a strong tropical storm. I like the NHC idea based on their timing. If this makes landfall on Sunday, I think this will be a strong tropical storm, 60 to 70 mile per hour sustained winds. If it's still over the water on Monday, then we may see this reach Category 1 hurricane status. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But regardless of the wind threat, that's not going to be the big story here. It's going to be the water and the rain, because this is going to take 4 or 5 days just to get out of the southern states here, and this is going to bring a lot of rainfall. All these yellows here on the HPC forecast map indicate 7+ inches, and we have a bullseye of over a foot to almost a foot and a half of rain over southeast Louisiana and the New Orleans area. This could be very bad for flooding. I know some of these areas are still under drought, so the rain is in some sense a good news, but this is too much in here. So we could see some flooding developing over the south and the central Gulf Coast here. You can see a little bit of the rain extends into eastern Texas. I know you guys have been really hoping for some rain out of this. It doesn't look like, with the upper low over here trying to keep convection away, it doesn't look like you're going to get that much. Some of these random showers could get over the coast like I talked about, but in terms of significant rain, what you really need is a direct hit here, and unfortunately your death ridge is going to block that kind of a movement. So unfortunately this is not going to be your drought buster storm, it looks like. There may be other chances down the road, but unfortunately no go again here. Now we can go out to Hurricane Katia. She's back to hurricane status after being downgraded yesterday as expected, and she still looks a little bit sloppy. There's no eye at all in here. The CDO is still weighted off a little bit to the north here, and you can see there's these outflow boundaries racing off to the southwest of the storm, indicating dry air is still filtering into her circulation, but eventually she should try to mix this out and strengthen again, becoming a Category 2, eventually probably a Category 3 hurricane down the road here. And we're still watching the track of this fairly closely. The east coast of the U.S. still needs to keep a watchful eye on the storm. It's not going to be a major concern for the next few days, but it's worth watching. You can see the European ensembles here out to day 8. These purple regions indicate ensemble member variants showing where the storm could be in 8 days, and we can see an envelope indicating locations anywhere from the Bahamas up towards the Canadian Maritimes here. So the European is showing a small batch that indicate a landfall threat down in here, and some of the models have been looking at that periodically over the last couple of days. And with the dangerous pattern we've been talking about, this is worth keeping an eye out for. However, I do think that she's still going to be able to escape and move out to the north here. And if we look at the pattern for the next couple of days, this is the GFS ensembles, day 5, 500 millibar mean heights and anomalies. The reason she should still escape, I think, is because you can see what I've been talking about, this Alaska trough in here. Now, this does two things. When there's a lot of broad troughing, um, that blue color went away. Let me try to refresh this real quick here. So this blue color indicates a strong trough in Alaska. Now, if you have a lot of broad troughing up here, this generally tends to pump the ridge all across the southern Canada and the northern U.S., and this tends to bring storms to the coast in here. However, notice that this trough is a lot sharper than it was forecasted to be a few days ago. So now the models are indicating a very strong trough in here, almost like a winter type trough. This is really pumping the ridge in here. And this is amplifying it so much that there has to be some kind of a response over the eastern United States. Even though the jet wants to stay flat and the ridging to stay tough in here, you can see that with the ridge this amplified, there has to be some kind of a response on its eastern side over the eastern U.S., especially since we have Lee coming up in here over the southern U.S. that's going to keep a weakness over the eastern seaboard that should allow Katia to still scoot out. You can see that even if she's moving due west in here due to a nosing ridge to her north, she still has to turn out here before she reaches the stream flow out of the southwest. So this should still escape between Cape Hatteras and Bermuda. However, for both of these locations, it's worth just watching carefully. Don't lose any sleep over it, but just keep an eye on it just in case, because this pattern is a dangerous one. And you can see again, this is the European day 4. This is Katia out here. You can see if we still have Lee as a significant system by this time, by early next week over the northern Gulf, notice how the ridging is building in here. See all these purple colors? There's heights in here that are raised due to the outflow from Lee that I've been talking about for a few days now that will intensify the ridge between the two storms. And if you have intensifying ridging in here, this helps to bump and shepherd Katia up into the waiting weakness over the eastern seaboard and help bring her out east of the United States. So in a sense, if Lee is still around here, it may help keep Katia away from us during the coming days. But that's only if Lee is still around early next week. If he moves in quickly tomorrow or Sunday, then it may not be as much of an effect. But either way, I think Katia will still escape between Cape Hatteras and Bermuda. We'll see how that goes. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.